Listen. His music speaks for itself. Today we're spending time with musician Max Pollak.
I was born and raised in Vienna, Austria. I wanted to start tap dancing when I was 5 because I saw Fred Astaire on television. But in Vienna at that point there was no tap instruction to be found. It was only classical. Not knowing any better, between the ages of 5 and 11, I did a little ballet and then nothing, until finally somehow we managed to track down a tap class. Then I got into playing drum set, and I got into jazz music through a high school friend who was a trumpet player who was into jazz. And together with him, I founded a marching New Orleans-style brass band. I went to visit New York in 1991 and happened upon the audition notice from Heather Cornell, where she advertised that she was looking for a dancer for Manhattan Tap. At Heather's audition, she taught us Scrapple from the Apple, which is one of their signature pieces. For me, it was like the glove fitting because I'd been working on bebop, like literally transcribing Charlie Parker solos, Kenny Clark's drum solos, listening to bebop like incessantly at that point. And when I came to the audition, nobody else seemed to be comfortable necessarily with that. Some of them came from a dance background or a studio background. A lot of them came from a musical theater background, both of which don't really provide the student with a strong background in musical knowledge or understanding, which, by the way, I think is completely unacceptable. But the effect was that most people, when you said, you know, like, do you know the form of this song, would say, what form? What form? What of what? I ended up, you know, like sort of like sliding into this level in New York rather than just having to start from zero, you know, because Manhattan Tap at that point was already very well established. I first got my student visa through Broadway Dance, but only for a year, and then I said, you know what, I can't handle so many ballet classes. I need to study music. So I switched to the new school and I started studying jazz drums and composition and arrangement, which at that point was at Mannes College. And Mannes required that you do 2 years of classical harmony and theory, which was great. I was scared because I hadn't really worked on classical music that much, but it was really key for me to now be able to do what I'm doing now. Because I started learning the key elements of classical music, how everything works, understanding how scores work, you know, harmonic development, the basic structures of classical forms and things like that, and how the classical harmony and theory and counterpoint then relates to jazz. So I spent days and nights practicing drums, doing my homework on the piano, writing homework assignments, and then going to rehearsal with Heather and going on tour. And yeah, it was a lot of work. Yeah. Midnight oil, lots of it, lots of it, lots of it. Once I started getting into Afro-Cuban music through my studies also at the New School with Bobby Sanabria, who used to be the drummer for Tito Puente's band and is largely responsible for me falling in love with Cuban everything. That made my interest blossom in this whole subject. Of course, first I had to wrap my own head around what I was trying to do, which was basically trying to integrate all these rhythms that I was learning on the conga drums, the bata drums, the timbales and whatnot, onto my feet, and then trying to coordinate all the other patterns at the same time. If you just play do-da, 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 it can create amazing things when the other plays are you know, that kind of thing, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, this kind of is connected, and I'm part of the melody, but then he is too, so we are actually connected. And that feeling really spoke to me and was a different experience from playing jazz. You know, because the rhythmic connection is different when you play jazz. There's like, everybody has their own place, and they combine, but they don't necessarily interlock in the same way.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like you're walking next to each other very solidly and in one line, and you're going at the same pace. But in Cuban music, it's like you're like hugging and like, you know, you're sort of so interlaced rhythmically. It's just a different feeling. Just like in jazz, everybody feels this. Yeah. Well, in Cuban music, everybody feels this. Yeah. All the time. There's no question. And that's the given. Mm-hmm. So that's a little bit more complex as a starting point than just this. It's just a different level of consciousness. So one of my key experiences that made me want to sing while playing was watching a video of the Dizzy Gillespie United Nations Orchestra with Ignacio Berroa on drum set and Danilo Perez on the piano. That's why I was watching it, because I was playing with Danilo and Ignacio, and I wanted to check out more of the stuff they were doing. And then Airto was the percussionist, which was, you know, super heavy. And Airto does a solo on that video. It's a DVD. And he plays all these toys and like starts really subtle with these like little gongs and bells and things. And then he gets a little heavier, and then he switches to the bells. And all of a sudden, he puts this ridiculous groove down just with his hands. And then he starts singing. And like at that moment, like the heavens opened up, and I went, what is going on? This guy is like insane. How can you do that? All like grooving his ass off and then singing. That's when I decided, okay, I need to be able to do that. It's kind of the pastiche that is created when you listen to the music, because there are so many incredible colors coming from all these organic instruments, none of which are European, you know? But when you listen to it, especially the first time, to me it was like looking at a painting. I saw colors that I had never seen before, in a way, you know? Just because the way they use the conga drums, the way they play the claves, the way they play bells, didn't sound like anything I had heard before. There was so much nuance and so much tonality and so much inflection in every single note that came out of their hands from the drums. It was just, it was a mastery of melodic control on a percussion instrument that I had never experienced. Playing a drum with a stick enables you to evoke a certain number of colors, but playing a skin drum with your hands makes it speak. In African American musical history, hand drums were forbidden and were substituted with stick drums because they were present from the French military in New Orleans, and they were adapted, and they seemed less threatening to the Europeans because they were a familiar sound. European march drumming was a familiar concept to the Europeans. So to mix the African rhythmic sensibility with a stick drum was less threatening than to hear African drums being played by Africans with their hands. In Cuba, however, that development did not happen. Of course, they also had some marching instruments, marching drums and stuff, but they were allowed to keep some of the original African instruments as long as they kept them out of sight. They were not allowed to be played publicly. Only on one day of the year, the Dia de los Reyes, January 6th, And in Cuba specifically, it was the day where basically Congo Square was happening. The Africans were allowed to parade and play their instruments, wear their traditional garments, and sing and dance their traditional music on that one day. And that's still today a major carnival event in Cuba, all over Cuba. Because I was lucky to work with Danilo Perez for a couple of months in the Danilo Perez trio, I learned a lot from Danilo, first of all, who's one of the greatest pianists around, and also from Johnny Benitez, the bass player, and Ignacio Berroa, who was the drum set player from Cuba. And Ignacio was one of the first really, really major jazz drummers who came onto the American scene having integrated Afro-Cuban folkloric rhythms fully on the drum set. That's a very tricky thing. That only started happening in the 80s. You know, the process of integrating these folkloric rhythms onto the drum set is essentially the same process that I then took over into tap dance and body percussion. There's a bell part, and then there's a low drum part, a middle drum part, and a high drum part. How do I make all that work in a body percussion and tap setting? Because the experience started with dancing and drumming, it was always a full body experience. And to me, it was clear that the only way to really get into this was by studying the dance. Because also the dance movements had been really impactful. You know, like when I saw the rumba movement, my head exploded. I had never seen anything that smooth and that elegant and that new, you know, because it was this weird combination of these round African movements with these flamenco inflections and then these sudden movements and then this round thing again. And it didn't look at all like the West African dance I had seen before, you know, like with djembe and the sort of like, you know, sabar kind of thing. It was a completely different African dance, but it was clearly African dance. It was just a style of African dance I'd never experienced before. And I realized how much I didn't know. And I could tell that they were telling stories with each move. And as soon as I started studying, that's what they were telling me. Everything connects with a narrative. It gave me something to think about when I was performing, when I was dancing. And it gives me something to think about now, when I'm improvising. You know, I sort of slip into this world of mythological, spiritual beings, you know, that move around the universe somehow, trying to move the cosmos this direction, that direction, or, you know, make something happen, turn something this way, calm the waves, get the storm going, or, you know, start the disease, bring the disease down, heal somebody, or try to mislead somebody purposely in order to get something to happen. These kinds of things make me forget that I'm tap dancing, because I don't want to be thinking about tap dancing. I want to be improvising. Once you spend time on musicians like Louis Armstrong or Coleman Hawkins or, you know, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Thelonious Monk, you understand why they are still famous, because there's nobody who sounds like them. And they had that impact on the world. They gave their voice to the musical world. And that was always my fascination, and that's what I aspired to. It's important to be able to distinguish between somebody else's voice, somebody else's path, and your own path. I wanted to make a music CD that featured tap as the leading voice, but not just as a solo voice, but rather as an integrated part of the band, you know, namely the rhythmic backbone, with no other percussion instrument necessary. how can I make tap dance and body percussion so strong that it can really hold up an entire band? And that was a lot of time shedding, just practicing until my stuff was so solid that any musician could rest on it without a drum set player, without a conga player. Just, I can just play with a piano player or with a bass player, it doesn't matter, or with a tres player or with a rumba ensemble, and the singers will hear my groove and they know exactly what I'm doing and they'll start singing as if there was a whole ensemble playing. That's what I wanted to do. That's what I always wanted to do. And that took a long time. I start out with a certain groove that I find fascinating, and I take it apart into its individual parts, and then I translate one of the drum parts into a melody, literally. I put notes onto the rhythm that reflect the flow of the groove, just in a melodic fashion. That's the basic idea behind Rumba Tap Band, my group, my band, which the CD is coming out July 2nd, by the way. They're being pressed right now. I'm very happy about that. One thing I understood is that the spirituality is transported through the music. Absolutely. It's transported through the songs, it's transported through the rhythms, it's transported through the movement. And you don't necessarily have to be an initiated member of the religion in order to get benefit of the spiritual power of this music. It's like you don't have to be Christian to be touched by the Mozart Requiem or Bach chorale. It's spiritual music, and God, or whatever you decide to call it, is in there. Like spirituality is in every great folkloric music. If you accept it and think about it as that, your life will be a whole lot better if you can understand and let music affect you in that sense as a positive spiritual influence. Because when I was growing up, folkloric Austrian music to me meant nothing. I didn't know anything about it, but it wasn't really present, and now I'm trying to get back to that, and that makes me really happy because of what I've learned in the last 25 years, I now understand my own culture better. And that's really the greatest thing that I feel could have ever happened to me. Open your eyes and travel and go places you haven't been before. Most important thing you'll ever do in your life. You will learn more than in any school. Talk to people. Learn as many languages as you can. Artist or no artist, doesn't matter. Yeah. I'm glad we made it happen. Yeah?